Earlier this week, our guest who's coming up from Houston, Ron Paul, was in committee, our 25th hearing of the month on the 9/11 Commission report. Here's about a minute and 11 seconds of what he had to say, and we want to ask him to further amplify on this.
Commission report, and I believe Governor Kaine has mentioned it, that we have to use all the tools available to us. And yet, I think there's one tool that seems to have been neglected that I would like to suggest. It is the tool of rethinking our foreign policy and considering possibly that our foreign policy of interventionism helped precipitate our crisis. And I think at times the report alludes to this, that our presence in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf helped to serve to incite the terrorists. There was a base in Saudi Arabia which they were very unhappy about, and this motivated many of them to participate. And yet we don't talk about that. If anything, the emphasis here is more of the same. You know, we need more money and more intervention. And that, to me, is discouraging, especially if it is correct that our participation over there has contributed to it.
Ron Paul, good morning, and tell us what you think would really make a difference in this process.
Well, it would have to change probably 50 years of history and then have a new foreign policy. I do accept the thesis that our foreign policy is more of a detriment to us than a benefit. So to reverse a foreign policy that has been endorsed by the Republicans and the Democrats, and for that reason, the majority of the American people, I think won't be very easy. But this certainly is a time that we should consider it. Because a lot of people do believe that our presence in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf helped to precipitate the crisis. And not only our presence there, but our on-again, off-again type of foreign policy, where we are at one time an ally of Saddam Hussein, and we helped build weapons that we knew he had, and then encouraged him to invade Iran. And at the same time, when we were fighting the Soviets, we decided that Osama bin Laden was a worthy ally. And it's this on-again, off-again support an individual at one time and then withdraw support. And I think overall that is a net negative for us because it distracts from what we should be doing, and that is defending this country and our borders. We have our troops all around the world, and it doesn't look like it's going to ease up. I think the consensus that comes out of this 9/11 report, the way I read it, is they want more of the same. They want more money to go into these areas. They might want to vary the approach a little bit, but they don't want to even discuss the fact that a foreign policy of interventionism may well have been the major cause of the 9/11 crisis.
Do you still define your personal philosophy as libertarian?
I do, but if you said what it is, I usually volunteer that I'm a strict constitutionalist. It happens to be that libertarians are very strict on interpreting the Constitution. So the two I see very much the same. I think the founders were very libertarian in that they didn't write in the Constitution an opportunity for the federal government to be big. They certainly didn't write into the Constitution that we should assume the role of world policemen, and that we should be policing the world and we should be working on an empire. That's certainly not in the Constitution. So I think the strict constitutional approach is very, very libertarian.
Ron Paul was born in Pittsburgh. He went to medical school at Duke, undergraduate school at Gettysburg College, Air Force 63 to 65, Air National Guard 65 to 68, was a flight surgeon for a while, was a OBGYN, or probably still is, but practiced that before he got back into Congress. Sought this U.S. Senate nomination from Texas in '84 and was Libertarian Party nominee in '88 for president. Let me ask you about a story on the front page of the New York Times. It's another one of those famous leaked stories, and I'll ask you, if you haven't read it, what your reaction is. Headline is, Bush preparing to bolster CIA director's power. Doug Gell and Philip Sheenan write this morning, President Bush is preparing to issue an executive order that would immediately grant more power to the Director of Central Intelligence, designating him to fill much of the role envisioned for a future National Intelligence Director, according to senior government officials who have been briefed on the plan. The order, to be issued as soon as this weekend before the Republican National Convention, would be cast as an interim measure intended as a first step toward putting into effect recommendations of the September 11th Commission. Quick reaction to that.
Well, I don't think it was a lack of bureaucracy or lack of money that caused 9/11. Matter of fact, we were spending $40 billion, and we had a huge amount of information. To give the CIA more power and more authority to accumulate more information, and we avoid the subject of interpreting or reinterpreting or reassessing our foreign policy, I think it'll be wasted money. And it may even be more confusing because there was a tremendous amount of information available before 9/11. It was the coordination. And whether it's the financial information that is also a subject of the 9/11 Commission or the CIA type of information, it's overall policy. It looks like what we're trying to do is solve a problem which is more philosophic and more related to the foreign policy by more bureaucracy, like it's a technical problem, a bureaucratic foul-up. I think it's much different than that.
One more paragraph, and we'll take a call. The New York Times reports the interim action by the White House would strengthen the hand of the current director of Central Intelligence, who heads the Central Intelligence Agency and has nominal authority over all intelligence agencies, but whose actual powers beyond the CIA have been limited. The government officials who have been briefed on the document said they understood that it would effectively create as powerful a national intelligence chief as permissible under current law. A couple of quick things, and we got callers waiting. Do you like the idea of an executive order? How much you think should come to Congress? And do you think this is a political motive on the part of either the White House or John Kerry to get this out of the way before the November 2nd election?
Well, I don't know much what happens in Washington doesn't have a political connotation. I think that's the way the whole system works. But just building a bigger bureaucracy, I have very little hope that that's going to do any good whatsoever.
Let's take a call from Stafford, Virginia for Dr. Ron Paul, who is in Houston this morning. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. How are you, Brian?
Fine.
Good. I would like to comment on the interesting juxtaposition between your prior guest and this guest. I wanted to comment on something your prior guest said, and that was when he talked about the Patriot Act and the founders turning over in their graves. I think he forgets about the Alien and Sedition Acts. I do agree with what your present guest has said in terms of our foreign policy in the Middle East, and I think that it's been flawed for a number of years, but even before we got involved in the war. And I would like to see us address some of those things. I would also like to see us address our energy policy. I think those two things go hand in hand.
Thanks, caller. Let's go to Representative Paul. Go ahead, please.
You know, I think it's interesting. One of the reasons given for us to be in the Persian Gulf, and certainly in the first Persian Gulf War, it was said very clearly that we're over there to protect oil. But isn't it amazing that the more we're over there, the higher the price of oil goes? So even from a pragmatic viewpoint, it doesn't seem to work. But I think, yes, and like I said earlier, it isn't just the last few years that we have devised a policy that is detrimental to us. It's been over many, many decades. If you take the Iranian situation, which I consider very, very serious, I mean, now we have the Al-Qaeda complained about us based in Saudi Arabia. That was a major event. They saw that as defiling the Holy Land. And yet now we have assumed control of two Muslim countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, on each side of Iran. So that is nothing more than inviting trouble. But, you know, Americans seem to have such a short memory, and Muslims seem to have very long memories. Very long in terms of hundreds of years, but just go back into the 50s when they had an elected democracy. You know, we're over there to promote democracy. Well, we had an elected democracy, or they had an elected democracy in Iran, and in the Eisenhower administration, we went over there and helped install the Shah, which they didn't forget about, and certainly that led to the current crisis, part of the crisis, and the overthrow with the Ayatollah. And even today, we talk about we're really in Iraq for promoting democracy. At the same time, the Commission strongly supports the idea that we should expand our support for the dictatorship in Pakistan. And Pakistan is a dictatorship that overthrew an elected government. So it just doesn't add up. It just causes more problems. And I think that's why the advice of the founders of staying out of entangling alliances, stay out of nation building, and minding our own business, I think has so much merit to it. And I think the American people are starting to come around to this viewpoint. It's just that they don't hear it very often. They just hear that, oh, it's necessary to defend our freedoms to be over there. And quite frankly, I feel more threatened by our troops being deployed in so many places of the world. I don't feel more secure.
Our guest is one of 6 House Republicans that voted against the resolution to go to war against Iraq. We go to Trenton, New Jersey. You're on the air, Trenton.
Yes, sir. Good morning, gentlemen. I appreciate your position, Representative. I want to talk about some statistics about death. I want to talk about every year 400,000 Americans are killed from adverse drug reactions that the drug companies know about. Another 4 million are injured and crippled. It's costing $2 trillion over a 6-year period in terms of cost to our health care system. John Kerry's talking about $650 billion that he needs to fund his health care plan, which will ensure America's 44 million. Just reducing these by 50% would provide $1 trillion a year to John Kerry. And I'm not talking about, mistakes or inherent errors. I'm talking about the drug companies selling their prescription drugs and putting pressure on physicians.
Okay, Colin, we'll let you go. We're trying to concentrate today. You don't mind on the 9/11 situation because Congressman Paul was a member of the committee this week that heard that. Let me go on to Collingwood, New Jersey, for a call. Go ahead, Collingwood. You're on the air.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. Mr. Paul, you're one of the few remaining American heroes and one of the greatest American patriots in history. Thank you for your positions.
Thank you.
I totally support your position of non-interventionism, and I think a lot of Americans also do. You're absolutely right. As far as oil goes, I believe in free market capitalism, and the artificial government supports through corporate welfare and also military protections for the oil companies must be factored into the cost of a barrel of oil, or we're not seeing the true price. What's your take on that, sir?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. People forget about that. They say we're paying $45 per barrel. But what you're suggesting is that it's a lot more than that because through our military budget, we're spending a lot more. And the other factor they forget about when they talk about the cost of oil is the inflation, the basic need for the price of oil to go up because the dollar's going down in value. And one of the reasons the dollar goes down in value is we print too many. And why do we print too many? Because we finance a deficit. And a large part of our deficit comes from this $450 billion military budget. I don't consider that a defense budget because I don't think it's designed for defense as much as militarism. So if you add all those factors in, it tells you why the oil price is very high. But there's no sign that this is going to go down. Everything tells me that this is going to get a lot worse because I think the crisis is spreading over there. I think those who designed the war over there are very anxious to go into Syria and Iran. They're looking for an opportunity. They're already talking about, oh, well, he might have nuclear weapons. Well, the Soviets had a lot of nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. They're not a democracy, and we want to send them more money. So it doesn't make any sense at all.
Will you vote for President Bush?
Well, maybe if he called me and asked me for my vote. I haven't announced a support for President Bush, and I'm not sure he really wants it because it might be a detriment to it. When Ronald Reagan was president, he had called me twice and asked me for support, and they used my name, but it might harm President Bush, so he hasn't been interested too much in my name being attached to his campaign, so I guess it depends on what would happen there.
Denver, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Paul, my name is Lisa Wade, and I would like to know, have you been watching the 9/11 Commission reports on television?
Well, I watched a good bit. Of course, I attended the two and participated in the one dealing with the banking committee, the financial services, and the one on international relations. And I watched some of the others, but I didn't watch them all, no.
The two people that were from Al Jazeera TV participating in the 9/11 Commission report that was on several days ago.
Mr. Marazi, as you're talking about, who testified, he was also here on the call-in show. What's the point? What point did he make that you want to talk about?
I think there's a great deal of good that's happening between our country and the Middle East, and I think that you're wrong in saying that there's we're coming up with stuff, and I think there was a great stuff that wasn't uncovered in past candidacies.
Caller, are you optimistic that this country can get a democracy started in Iraq?
Well, you know what? If we've watched the 9/11 reports and we watched what was influencing the other day, is we do not want to change these people or change their religion. If we can influence them and we can set an example and they decide for a democracy on their own, that would be wonderful.
Thanks. Dr. Paul?
Yeah, well, I think she's touching on what I advocate. I think we should set a good example. I think we should deal with our problems here. If some people in this country believe that it's a democratic thing to allow demonstration at the Central Park in New York, we ought to be seriously talking about that. But to impose democracy on a country by force, it doesn't work. They've tried it 32 times since World War II, and it hasn't worked one time. Think of the effort that we made in Vietnam. We've done much better since we've been trading with Vietnam than we did when we were fighting with them.
Dr. Paul, what was the 32 number? What did that apply to?
This was a story out of the L.A. Times where an individual, and I will modify that slightly because he listed 32 different times we, intervened around the world at different times since I believe it was World War II. But he said there was one success, and I've taken that away from him because he claimed Colombia was a success. So if that's our success in promoting democracy, I mean that place is in civil war down there.
That was worldwide. 32 since World War II.
Right.
Do you happen to remember how long ago that story was, in case people want to find it?
I would say my office has a copy of that. We can dig it up. It's about a year ago, I would guess.
Okay, Douglasville, Georgia, for Dr. Ron Paul. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Paul. I have three-pronged questions. The first one is, did we or did we not have CIA agents on the ground in Iraq prior to the war? The reason why I ask is, prior to the war, they showed that Saddam Hussein had a bunker, 6 floors underground. They found this man in a rat hole. He had $500 million worth of U.S. currency. Don't know where he got that. He couldn't buy a bar of soap to wash his face. Was that a lie? And then the president came on and stated that had he made any mistakes, he said he didn't think so.
Thanks, caller. Got it. The point. Dr. Paul.
Well, I have no proof one way or the other whether we have CIA agents in Iraq before the war. I would assume we did. I mean, what have they been doing? But I would also assume that bureaucrats make mistakes, and we all know about the information and the misinformation and the confusion about what was said and what was understood prior to the invasion. But it's certainly what we see there today is not what was painted before the war. And I felt that same way before. And one of my contentions about the war was we had been bombing this country, for 14 years, or slightly less than that. At the same time, we had the embargo. Well, they had been shooting at our airplanes. Now, if they were a force to be reckoned with, something that we should fear, they would have at least come close to hitting one of our airplanes. And they didn't have an Air Force. They didn't have a Navy. I mean, to beat the drums of war and saying these people in Iraq are about to attack us, I thought that was such a far stretch. And yet the American people, at the time were quite willing to go. But I think there's a reassessment now. There's a major reassessment.
Any difficulty? You're San Marcos and Victoria down near San Antonio, your district. Where do you actually live?
I live on the coast, not too far from Houston. It's a little place called Freeport in Surfside, Texas.
Now, do you have any opposition in this election?
No, I don't. We've had redistricting redone this time, and I didn't get an exceptionally good Republican district. It's probably the most marginal district in Texas, but I did not have a Democrat file against me nor a Republican.
So you're home free.
Well, it is. I guess I might be my only competition, my own self. But no, I am. Right now, it looks pretty good.
Van Nuys, California, you're next.
Good morning, Representative Paul and Mr. Lamb. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you guys this morning.
Thank you.
I'm a fellow Houstonian myself. I say Houston, but it's really a small town outside of Houston called McNair near Baytown. I don't know if you ever heard of that place.
Right.
Yeah. First of all, I believe that China is a bigger threat to the world than Iraq was, but I don't see America beating the drum beats to get into China. And I have two questions for you this morning. Why is it that we are so strongly supporting Israel when Israel has spied on this country and they're selling weapons of mass destruction around the world? And my second question for you is, Dr. Paul, if you can handle this for me, is that why I read recently where Margaret Thatcher's son was trying to overthrow the government of Guinea-Bissau. And I was wondering, Equatorial Guinea, I'm sorry. And I was wondering, why are Europeans always going into people of color's countries and overthrowing governments and undermining the people?
Thanks, caller.
Well, I don't know anything about what Thatcher was doing, so I don't think I can comment on that, but that's been a problem of several hundreds of years of Europeans going into other countries. As far as China is concerned, I would agree they are probably a greater threat. And one analogy I use with China is, what if China gets a little bit stronger and they are the powerhouse and they put their navy in the Gulf of Mexico and put bases in Mexico? We would be pretty annoyed, but that's the equivalency of us being in the Persian Gulf and why there's so much resentment. As far as Israel go, that is a source. If you believe that the Al-Qaeda tells the truth, and there's no reason, they're ruthless and evil and monstrous, but I don't think they're telling lies about when they explain why they want to come after us. And they do use the support for Israel over the Palestinians as one of the excuses. And my position is rather simple. It's not anti-Israel. My position is neutrality. My position is to not get involved in these fights. And I think we would be better off as Americans. It certainly would be a lot cheaper for us. We're spending way too much money. We're going broke with this policy, and I think it just gets us into trouble.
Dr. Paul, quickly on the screen, we're going to put some numbers, and I wonder if you know if these are accurate or not. It says in fiscal year 2000, military aid to Israel was $3.1 billion. And then in fiscal year 2005, the proposed number is down to $2.2 billion. Economic aid goes from $949 million down to $360 million. Is it really going down that fast?
That I don't know, and you won't know until it's all over. And even if those numbers go down, sometimes we know that funds are fungible, and that you decrease some economic aid, and then there's military aid. Just think how they shift funds around in the military budget, and weapons can be shifted and sold and shifted around. So I would have a little trouble accepting the fact that soon you will see a decrease in aid to Israel. I don't think that's likely to happen. What's more likely to happen, there's a lot more hostility directed toward Egypt, and I'm all for cutting the money to Egypt. They've gotten more money than any other Muslim country ever. And 15% of the Egyptian people support us. So my point in the hearings was, it's not a very good investment. So I think the odds of really cutting any of those programs aren't very good. Matter of fact, with this Millennium Challenge account, we're actually expanding foreign aid. We're not decreasing it.
Dallas, Texas, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Paul. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you. You're one of the few people up there telling the truth, maybe 6 or 7 congressmen. I would like to talk about the elephant in the living room, which is the Israeli lobby in the United States, which is by far the most powerful lobby in the country, and they are the ones who determine our Middle East policy. And that the Israeli lobby, I believe it can be proven, is behind our involvement in the war against Iraq.
Thanks, caller. We're going to let you go. He's a very frequent caller and abuses our 30-day policy, but he's got an issue that I don't want to cut you off from answering that.
Well, I don't think it's that simple. I think that, and just as I answered the previous question, I think Israel is important. The Al-Qaeda claims it is important. But there are other factors, too, involved. I think oil is a big factor. I think the military-industrial complex is a big factor. I think Christian Zionism is a big factor. And I think the neocons' determination to invoke a new foreign policy on us, because they're not shy about the need for American presence around the world. And they're sincere in believing that they'll promote the goodness of America. And I think the goodness of America has to be done voluntarily by setting good example, and it cannot be spread through this military might.
Arlington Heights, Illinois. Good morning. You're on with Dr. Ron Paul.
Yes, hello, Mr. Congressman. I want to congratulate you for being a Republican for Texas and standing up for what makes perfectly good sense. I can't see. We were misled in going into Iraq. It's obvious. No weapons of mass destruction, no links to Al-Qaeda. What you're saying is what I want to hear John Kerry say. And I voted for Baghdad Bush, I must say, and I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed of this country since I voted for him. And I wish that John Kerry would be talking the way you are. How can we get this to happen, sir?
Thanks, caller. Thank you.
Well, I think it makes the point that the leadership on both major parties aren't too far apart. You know, when the issue of the war came up on international relations, and I was on the committee, I offered an amendment and a substitute to declare war. And I told them they would have to vote it down because I'm not voting for it. And they were very annoyed with this. And it was unanimously voted down. We even had a recorded vote. But my point was, if we're going to war, if we're going to send these young people over there and commit the American people to financing this, we shouldn't go to war without declaring war. Then you turn it over to the military and you tell them to win the war. Now, what happens when we go to war without the declaration, we really don't win them. And that's what happened in Korea and Vietnam and the Persian Gulf. And this also gives the option for a person like Senator Kerry to vote for giving the authority to the president, but not making a decision like he should. Should we go to war or not? That is not a presidential decision. That is a congressional decision. But we in the Congress are at great fault. I mean, I find fault with the president and the foreign policy, but I find great fault with the Congress because we give up our prerogatives. And when we do that, then you can have individuals like Senator Kerry come back and say, oh, yeah, I gave you this authority and we thought the war was necessary, but you didn't do it right. Well, you know, that isn't the way it works. It's not the way it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, that's the way it's been working for so many decades. But I like the old-fashioned way. If you're going to fight a war, you declare it and you win it and you get it over with. And I would bet then we would have less war and less fighting.
Bradenton, Florida. You're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to first of all thank C-SPAN for having this forum, and secondly, I do have a question for Mr. Paul, but I'd like to also say that I am a independent, and I support Ralph Nader, and I tried calling several times when Mr. Cameo was in, and I got through for it to ring 4 different times with nobody answering the phone. It just rang off the hook, and I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. But first, I'd like to say to Mr. Paul, I do thank you very much. You seem like a very reasonable person. Normally, I don't side with a Republican whatsoever, but in this case, you seem to be very logical. And I would like to ask you, have you ever heard of a website? It's 911 in plain sight. It's very controversial. First, if you haven't, I would like to ask you to please look it up if you have time. And if you have, I would like to hear your comments about it.
Thanks, caller. By the way, Dr. Paul, are you into the computer age? Do you get on the web every day?
I do. I look at the internet very early in the morning, and it's very, very helpful. I'm still old-fashioned enough. I still love reading newspapers, too. So I look at newspapers, but I will also look at the internet. And the one dealing with the war issue that I look at immediately is the antiwar.com. And then on economic issues, I look at LouRockwell.com.
Now, do you still practice medicine at all?
No, up until a few months ago, I was doing a little bit of teaching at the medical center, but it's gotten too difficult with the schedule. But I've always been interested and loved medicine. That's the reason I went back to medicine for 12 years between the 2 tours of duty in Washington. So I miss it.
Let's go to Baton Rouge next for Ron Paul. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Mr. Paul. Or is Dr. Paul?
It is.
Okay. I will never forget the morning of 9/11, and I'm probably we're the same age. I understand you're a pacifist, right? And I wanted to
No, that's not right.
That's not right.
Hold on,
No,
caller.
that's
Let
not
him
right.
explain what he is. Just briefly, Dr. Paul. You're not a pacifist. What do you believe? When do you believe
Okay.
we're going to war?
I believe in the just theory of war, and that is that when you're attacked and you've used up all other means, then you defend oneself and one's country, and it's in the Constitution, and that's one of our major responsibilities. But I don't believe in starting wars or maneuvering ourselves into places around the world where we shouldn't be.
Thanks. Baton Rouge, go ahead.
Okay. My whole point was this old boy, George Bush, who I love dearly, mostly because of his Christian bearings on pro-life, etc. He really couldn't start a war on his own. Congress is the one who voted for this. This is my whole point in calling, and I think people just want to blame him a little too much.
Thanks, caller.
Well, I think I touched on that. Congress has reneged on their responsibility, but it is true. We have now, in the last 50 years, allowed our presidents to start wars. Think of Korea. Do you think the Congress endorsed it? But they indirectly endorse it. Yes, we did not declare war. We gave the authority. We transferred the constitutional authority to go to war and not go to war. And if you recall, President Bush says, I haven't yet decided whether we have to or when we will do that. So the decision was put in the hands of the president. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. But we never ended Vietnam. It was never a declared war, but it was only ended when the Congress decided to withdraw the funds. It was through funding. And that's probably what will happen here in about 5 or 10 years. The American people will finally say, we've had enough and we can't afford it, and they'll start withdrawing funds again. But that's not going to happen soon. So Congress still is indirectly in charge, but they've reneged on their responsibilities.
Houston, you're next.
Good morning, Brian.
Hi.
I'm a first-time caller, and I'm so excited that I finally got on. I thank you so much for C-SPAN. Dr. Paul, I am a Democrat. I would never, ever vote for George Bush. But I have to tell you that you're very well thought of here in the Houston area, and we really appreciate your thoughts and the fact that I think if more people felt the way that you do, there wouldn't be this division of party. People would just vote for who they agree with the most. My question today is that I'm a grant writer in the Texas Medical Center. I have to tell you that right after 9/11, we had protection. You could not even park in front of a building. A car could not sit for a second. And now there's virtually nothing. I don't think that we're prepared. And in the medical center where we have patients that need to be protected, I think that the people need to know a plan. The city has no plan. And I'm wondering if you're aware of any plans were some catastrophe to happen in Houston that is the virtual public doesn't know about.
Thanks, caller.
Thank you.
Well, I think she makes a good point. The city doesn't have a plan, and I think that's where a lot of the responsibility should be. I don't like it to come from Washington because it gets too big and too confusing and too expensive. So if there's a lack of security in Houston, the city of Houston should be doing more. But I think that should be applied to the airlines as well. But the airlines don't want the responsibility. They turn it over to the government. I think all security should be handled by private owners. Basically, most security, especially in Texas, is provided by the owner of the house and the Second Amendment. But on an airline, you know, the government denied the right of an airline to defend itself with guns, and it still really doesn't have that right at all. So the responsibility should be on local communities and ownership of property. But today we've moved in the opposite direction. We've nationalized security at the airports, and then we're bailing out the airlines, and we give them insurance and all kinds of things. So we've moved away from the local government, private property, constitutional providing for security and have gone in the wrong direction.
Charleston, South Carolina, for Dr. Ron Paul. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Dr. Paul, and
Good morning.
thank you for your common sense approach to our country. My question is, what do you think we should do about our borders and the illegal aliens that are coming into our country, and what do you think of the Patriot Act? Thank you.
Well, I voted against the Patriot Act, and I've been working hard to try to repeal certain portions of it. Especially the provision where they can go into libraries and find out what everybody's reading, and also the provision that allows the unannounced searches and seizures of property without even telling people they've gone into houses. So those parts have been the worst part, but I did not vote for the Patriot Act. Now, the other question again was
about the borders. What should you do about the borders?
The borders. That is not easy for me, because I think I have easy, simple answers which seem clear cut. But the borders are tougher. But one thing I know about is that we worry too much about the border between Syria and Iraq. We were at a hearing the other day, and there was severe criticism against the Syrians. Why don't they secure the borders? There's too many people going from Syria into Iraq. I said, well, you know what? Our responsibility are our own borders. Maybe if we weren't worrying about borders over there, we'd have more personnel and more money to spend on monitoring our borders here. So I believe that's a constitutional function, to deal with our borders. I don't believe in amnesty. Matter of fact, I don't believe that we should provide services for illegal aliens. And I think there are other ways of taking care of acute crises in that manner. So there's a lot of things that we can do. I don't believe in putting standing armies on the border. That's not attractive to me. But there's other ways to secure borders, and I don't think it should be men who are trained to fight wars. But if you had the resources and the people and the personnel, if we had them back home and we weren't spending so much money overseas, I think then we should concentrate on our borders. Take, for instance, our Coast Guard. Most people think the Coast Guard exists to protect our coast, but we have Coast Guard cutters around the world. Matter of fact, one was shot and damaged over in the Persian Gulf. Well, I don't want the Coast Guard in the Persian Gulf. I want them in the Gulf of Mexico and a few places closer here. So there's a lot of things that we could do in improving the border situation.
Whittier, California. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Brian. I love C-SPAN.
Thanks.
And Dr. Paul, you've always been a big hero of mine, great conservative. But I think you've gone over the edge, and you've seemed to developed kind of an isolationist attitude about bringing our troops home and not having troops all over the world. If we don't have them all over the world, then maybe China or Russia or some other country would have them. And I think at that point we'd be finished. I think that World War II is a perfect example. Hitler would have been, been free to do what he wanted because we wouldn't have gone over there and saved Europe.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, the word isolation isn't the proper term, because I believe in really dealing with other countries in a much more diplomatic fashion, a much more peaceful fashion, and that is with trade. Isolationism usually means that there will be protectionism, but people should be able to go back, and we should have exchange of ideas and education. So there's a lot of things. So it isn't isolation with the borders closed. That is not what I'm advocating. But you're right about the troops. I'd bring the troops home for two reasons. We don't have the authority, and we really don't have the money, and it doesn't work. I mean, think of the lives lost in Korea and Vietnam, and now the lives lost in the Persian Gulf, and things aren't much better off. And we could go into a long dissertation on the history of World War I and World War II, but it was unnecessary for us to be in World War I, and that peace treaty was a disaster. The peace treaty of World War I caused World War II, so one thing leads to another. But you worry about the Chinese spreading. I mean, what is their history? How often have the Chinese put troops in Europe or troops in the Americas? The odds of that are pretty slim. And it just is not likely to happen. So I would say there's a reason to make the case for bringing our troops home and labeling it something slightly different than isolationism. It's just a more wise constitutional approach to our foreign policy.
Our guest was, as we said, born in Pittsburgh. He went to Gettysburg College, and he also has a medical degree from Duke. At what point in your life do you think you got this philosophy you have?
Well, I think as long as I lived, but I always claimed that during my teenage years and college years, it was sort of knocked out of me because I thought, I must be the only one in the world that believes this way. And it was only during my medical school that I picked up a book by Hayek, Road to Serfdom. who's an Austrian free market economist, that I read him, I said, my goodness, he's saying the things that I actually naturally believe. Then I discovered this Austrian school and found out that you can defend on a moral basis and an economic basis true capitalism, free markets where people are free to produce, and that it also entails the notion that we're not a militaristic country, that we don't have to have troops around the world. So I would say in my early medical years, I was fascinated through economics. So it was through the study of free market economics that I got interested in politics, and really didn't expect a political career. I became particularly interested in the monetary issue and believe very strongly that if you give the government power to print money, they will, and they'll spend too much, and they'll eventually ruin the money and ruin the country. And this is the reason both parties don't challenge the Federal Reserve System, because one side loves the entitlements. As a matter of fact, both sides seems to like the entitlements these days, and actually both sides tend to like foreign entanglements too. And we can't tax the people. If we raise taxes to balance the budget this year, we'd have to collect another $600 billion. And we can't do that, so they have to have a printing press. And I think that's all connected and all very important.
Those that want a little bit more on this, you can go into booknotes.org and look up Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, and you can find an explanation on, he wrote an introduction to the 50th anniversary edition of Road to Serfdom, if you want some background. We're going to ask you in a moment after we take a call, but the White House is now putting out that they're going to be signing, the President's going to be signing this executive order very soon, and we'll keep you up to date. But I'll ask you about that in a moment. We got a call waiting from Texas. What's the name of your town, please?
Rosario?
You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I just had a quick question. I was wondering if anybody's looked into the fact that Bush and Cheney own a lot of stock in Halliburton, and Halliburton happened to receive all the government contracts over there in Iraq.
Well, I think a lot of people have looked into it, and a lot of people have talked about it. I don't know if that's correct. I think you said that President Bush has stock. I don't think he does. I haven't heard that anyway, but we all know that Cheney had been the chief executive officer, and he still receives funds from there. But I think that's been fairly well discussed, and it does raise questions.
Let's go next to Tucson. Good morning.
Yes. I'm really, really interested in this program. I'm a 70-year-old widow. I've been widowed for 3 years. You said, are we any better off now than 4 years ago? I'm so much worse off than I was 4 years ago, it's almost laughable.
Do you blame the President for that, or is there other reasons?
I blame the President for that, because I think the last 4 years have just been terrible. And the way those things have affected me, especially. The other thing I'd like to say is this: if you could stop and try to think of how many people there are like me who sit and listen to all of these things, and at my age, I have now a lot of time to sit and listen, and I do. And we wonder, all of this money that's going for foreign aid, all of this money that's going for all of these things, and yet we turn around and say we don't have decent health care. That's one of my problems. I don't have decent health care because of what happened to my husband. I don't have a house anymore because during his illness, I lost my house. There are so many of us who are in this situation, and then when we hear all of these things, we say, you know, what on earth can we do?
Caller, let me ask you a quickie. You say you have bad health care. You got Medicare, don't you?
I have Medicare, yes, but Medicare is never, ever going to take care of you.
What did the government have to do with you losing your house?
Well, not necessarily the government, but because of not having adequate health care, eventually, before my husband could get on access, which is what Arizona has, we couldn't have anything.
Dr.
My
Paul.
husband was ill for 3.5 years before he died.
All right, thank you. Sorry. Dr. Paul?
Well, I think her story is a common story, and I think we're going to hear more of it, because it is connected to the excessive spending, the spending overseas, and the weak economy here, but it's also related to the monetary issue, because one of the characteristics of a destruction of a currency is that it hurts the people on the margin, it hurts the marginal worker, and it hurts the retired individual, because inflation exists. That is, her cost of living is going up. the cost of living goes up more rapidly when, in certain areas, when the government gets involved. So they're most involved in education and in medicine. So we have prices rising much faster there than any other places. Just think, 40, 50 years ago, we didn't even have the government involved, and we didn't have people laying around without medical care. So the more the government gets involved, sometimes the less we have. But we are in the process of destroying our money, which means that the people who are least able to afford it will have the higher cost of living, and they'll lose their jobs or get a job that pays a lot less. And she is reflecting what happens in a country when we pursue this. Some people benefit, at least in the early stages of an inflation, that is the printing of a lot of money. The people who get to use it first. The government spends the money before it loses value. Then it gives it to the banks, and then it gives it to the military-industrial complex. So these people get to spend the money when it has more value, and she is a victim of the type of system that we have. But it's not so simple as saying, well, let's just strike money here and give her more money. We have to think about the whole economic system and why freedom and the marketplace is a much better way of providing services and goods for everybody.
Associated Press had the leaked story overnight, and now here's another one this morning at 9:36. This moved amid a heated election year debate on intelligence reform. President Bush prepared to sign executive orders Friday strengthening the powers of the CIA director and establishing a new National Counterterrorism Center. The moves will, quote, improve our ability to find, track, and stop terrorists, White House Press Secretary Scott McClellan said. One executive order will give the CIA director additional authority on an interim basis to perform many of the functions of a proposed national intelligence director who would oversee all 15 of the nation's intelligence agencies. Bush also will work with Congress to create the position of national intelligence director, McClellan said. We will ask you about that after we take a Virginia Beach call. You're on the air. Hello, Virginia Beach. You're on the air. Jacksonville, Florida. Are you there? Jacksonville, Florida. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Paul, I'm a Republican, but I do disagree with so much of what you're saying, and it's kind of interesting that you're on the Republican ticket. But nevertheless, let me just say one thing to you as far as the war is concerned. You know, I'm 72 years old, and 10 years ago, I wanted to know why we didn't go after Saddam Hussein then, when he first broke the truce agreement that he had signed, and then when he later kicked the folks out that were there to see if he was being truthful about eliminating the weapons, etc. And I disagree that we should sit back and wait for another terrorist attack. You can call us terrorists if you will, but I disagree with you. And on the Patriot Act, you failed to mention when you said going into libraries to see what we're reading, you have to go before a judge and get approval before you can look at somebody's library records. Yes, sir, that's part of the law.
Thanks, caller. Go ahead, Dr. Paul.
That is not exactly so. You do not have to have a specific warrant to find out what one individual is going. They go in with a more blanket approach to look at all the records. So,
do they have to ever tell anybody that they've looked at your records or your emails?
I don't think so. No, they do not have to call you up and say we looked at your records. So,
have you had any instance that you know of where people's privacy has been abused?
No, but that's, I mean, the fact that the authority is there is important, because even if this president wouldn't abuse it and there was caution, it means what happens down the road is what's important.
Let's try Lowell, Ohio. You're on the air, Lowell.
Thank you for taking my call. You had a comment about China and the troops. My son lives in Panama, and they tell me that Panama Canal is being run by the Chinese, and they're really taking over Panama.
Dr.
Yeah,
Paul?
and there's a lot of Chinese in Panama.
Have you heard this?
Well, I think there is a Chinese company that is involved in some management down there, but I don't think the Chinese government has any troops there and that they control it. This would be similar to saying that we control China because we have businessmen in China, and we have a lot of businessmen in China right now. So this does not mean that we control China, nor does China control Panama.
Lake Zurich, Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Dr. Paul, you are a breath of fresh air in this country, and I salute you for your patriotism and so forth. I want to ask you about the neoconservatives that have hijacked the foreign policy of this country. What can you tell us about them?
Well, I don't think there's anything secret about the neoconservatives and their influence on the administration. And it's, they've been around for a good many years, and they have promoted an interventionist foreign policy. I believe they're very sincere. They believe in their program as sincerely as I believe in my non-intervention. And they have promoted this, and they have gained influence through the vice president. Dick Cheney is close to them, and the Defense Department and Rumsfeld, they're very close. And they believe that it is important for the world and for the United States to use force to promote our ideals. So it's just that I disagree with that. I don't believe it's legitimate to use force. And sometimes I think that blends in with these other reasons, such as oil and other things that prompts us to be involved in the Persian Gulf. But it certainly is a philosophy. It's a clear-cut philosophy, and it's in many ways exactly opposite of what we were advised, say, by the farewell speech of George Washington, where we were advised to stay out of entangling alliances.
Did you read the 9/11 report?
I haven't read the whole thing. I've had my staff do their very best to get over and summarize, and I've read every summary that I could find, but to say that I've read all those pages, no, I haven't.
We've had a couple hundred hours on the 9/11 report and all the 25 hearings this month. Has all this been worth it, and what kind of a grade would you give Tom Kean and others who have been involved in the 9/11 report?
Well, I guess it'd be two grades. On the grade of efficiency as doing something for the status quo and what's going on in the country without challenging anything, I would say, you know, they did as well as anybody. They probably get an A for that. But to really get to the meat of the matter and deciding what really is our problem in dealing with foreign policy, I would have to give them a failed grade because they want more of that, not less. They're advising that we send more money. For instance, they're advising us that we send more money to educate the children, to counteract the madrasas, that teaches, you know, the anti-American positions. But what they fail to see is that our intentions so often backfire. When the Soviets were in Afghanistan and we were secretly supporting Osama bin Laden, we literally used our CIA and our money to go over and encourage the madrasas to teach this radical Muslim philosophy in order to help defeat the Soviets. And that's the irony of it all. It so often backfires on us and comes back to haunt us. It's the unintended consequences. It's what the CIA says, watch out for blowback. These things have blowback, and they come back to get us. And that's why the approach of non-intervention is so attractive. Besides, you know, I just think I'm going to win this debate, not because I'm persuasive and that all of a sudden the Congress is going to change. I'll win this debate with others who believe this because we're going to run out of money. We can't afford it. That's how all empires fail. Empires finally stretch too far, and then they can't afford it anymore, and they get hit from all sides. We have the greatest military and the greatest power, and we can win every military battle. But we're not winning the peace, and we haven't been winning the peace, and this has been our problem. Earlier on, the gentleman suggested, why didn't we win the first time we went into the Persian Gulf? Precisely because we weren't there for the right reason. If we had been, we would have declared war, and we would have known that he was an enemy. We would have marched to Baghdad, and we would have taken care of it. But now it's all political. It's all, you know, here, now, change this. And also the dependency on the UN. In this transfer of power, this recent transfer of power, 21 times it was mentioned that the UN resolutions had to be upheld. So that was part of the reason why we transferred this power to the president. And you don't win wars that way. That's why we didn't go on to Baghdad, and that's why we should always stick to the rules. The rules are that the Congress declares war up and down. And also, when we do these things, and this also goes along with this executive order, the president shouldn't be able to do this. This should be done by the Congress. If we can avoid the Constitution in a few areas, whether it's the Patriot Act or going to war, there's nothing left. And that's our problem. There's no real rule of law and real concern. The weakest argument I can use on the House floor is a constitutional argument. And it just doesn't stir up much interest.
Washington, D.C., good morning. I'm sorry, Vancouver, Washington, you're on the air. Let's go to Lynbrook, New York. Lynbrook, New York, you're on the air.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good morning.
I'm a Democrat. I'm going to vote for John Kerry. I could not vote for George Bush. As a matter of fact, at one time I was a Republican, and I changed my affiliation because the Republican Party does not represent what I believe in at all.
Does John Kerry?
More like what I believe in.
Caller, does John Kerry represent what you believe in?
Much more so. The Democratic Party on a whole represents me much greater than the Republican Party.
What about on the war?
On the war, I don't believe we should have been there at all.
So why would you support John Kerry on that basis then?
Well, he isn't. At least he didn't take us to war. Okay, George Bush took us to war. I don't believe we should have gone to the war that we entered into in Iraq. I believe what Dr. Paul is saying more, that it should have been contained and all. My real question is, why is it in this country we always get the choices of the lessers?
Thanks, caller. Dr. Paul, go ahead.
The choice of what, the lesser?
Of the lessers, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately that's the case. Some people think it's a conspiracy. I don't quite buy into that, but I don't think the views of the major leadership of the Republicans and Democrats are all that much different. But I think this is a reflection of our culture and our educational system. I believe in the Austrian free market system of capitalism and hard money. Most Americans don't understand it nor believe in it because they're taught through their high schools and their colleges, and all the economic departments teach a modified version of Keynesianism. So if that's all they hear and reflect on, so whether you're in the Congress, whether you're in the courts, or whether you're in the Democratic Party or Republican Party, you vary techniques. And this is why it shouldn't surprise anybody that the majority of the Democrats and the majority of Republicans endorse foreign interventionism and welfareism here at home. But that to me is a reflection of a educational system that's been going on for a good many years. So I don't see the solution to the concerns I have being political. I'm not going to reverse the trends in Washington. All I can do is contribute a little bit to get people to think about these things, and hopefully there will be a new generation of young people that will come up and decide, I want something different from my government. I want something more from our government like the founders wanted. We want limitation of government power, and we want to believe in freedom, and we want to have confidence in freedom, and believe that we're all going to be better off if we protect individual liberty over and above everything else.
Stark, Louisiana, you're our last caller for Dr. Ron Paul. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Dr. Paul. I
Hi.
sure do thank you for your service. I think you're the only patriot that's left in Washington, D.C. My question is, irregardless of who's elected in November, aren't both parties going to institute the draft?
Thanks, caller.
I'm fearful the draft is coming, and you're right. Since I just described, I don't see a lot of difference. I would say that we should be vigilant. There's a lot of moves going on in Washington, the beefing up of the registration, more advertisements on the radio, the shortage of troops, and no change in the policies that I disagree with of adventurism around the world. So I think the war in the Persian Gulf is going to expand. I think the shifting of troops from Korea and Europe into the places of the Persian Gulf because they need more troops will suffice, and there's going to be more rebellion against the use of the reservists because they in many ways have been abused. So that leads me to believe and agree with you that there will be a draft and the pressure will be there regardless of which party wins.
We're covering Ralph Nader's speech down at the Reform Party convention this week. It'll be on tape and we'll run it later. And on Sunday morning from New York, we start our programs from New York tomorrow morning. On Sunday, we'll have Let You Go. You said, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, when in the hearing the other day, that this country has a $73 trillion unfunded mandate. First, did you say that? And if you did, what period are you talking about? And what does it mean?
You know, I don't recall saying that, but I think that number isn't too far from being wrong, and I guess it depends on how you calculate it. But the unfunded mandates are the ones like all the Social Security and all the benefits in the insurance program, and it's unbelievable. And you know, they would vary. I mean, is it for 20 years or 50 years or 70 years from the day you're born or just what? All we know is it is huge, and it's something that requires a large amount of taxes. This is the reason young people aren't very much interested in paying into Social Security. When I talk to young people and ask them to raise their hand if they would welcome the position where they could opt out of Social Security, they're all for it because they understand that, you know, in 40 or 50 years, they're not going to expect very much out of Social Security. But that is a reflection that this country is not technically bankrupt because we pay our bills by printing more money, but we're really insolvent. We don't have enough assets to match what we owe.
We're out of time, but I still want to ask you one more question. And I know this is not easy, but let's pretend that it's November the 3rd and the election is over. What then will be the number one issue that a president will deal with instead of what we're talking about today?
Well, I think it'll be what we're talking about today.
Well, I'm not talking about
I
mean, compared to this last couple weeks of talking about the veterans and all that stuff, what will be the issue on November the 3rd?
Well, one thing for sure, and I'll be delighted that it won't be what somebody was doing in the trenches of Vietnam 35 years ago. I think that will be gone. But I think it'll be Persian Gulf. I think the Persian Gulf crisis will have expanded by then, and it's going to catch everybody's attention, both for fiscal reasons as well as for the reasons such as the draft and the expansion of a war.
Dr. Ron Paul in Houston today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're out of time for this Friday morning on the Washington Journal. Have a nice weekend.